Okay, here's this. Got a couple of things to take care of. All right. Welcome, and we'll start right off with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And
Amen.
Amen.
it is an acknowledgement, Marianne. It's a blessing to God, thanking God for allowing us to, and in fact, commanding us to study Torah, which is divine teaching. That's what we're acknowledging. So what we are going to do is there's a tradition to study Song of Songs. So Passover is 7 days long, or 8 days long actually. And on the Sabbath, so there's always a Sabbath in between, or on one of those days it's going to be a Sabbath. There's a tradition of studying Shir Hashirim, which is the Song of Songs, on that Sabbath. And so that's what we're going to take a look at. We looked at the introduction to the commentator Rashi's commentary, and now we're going to actually look at Rashi's commentary. And the rabbis saw the books of Song of Songs, which are these love statements, as actually being a metaphor for the love of God and Israel, and in a sense also discussing the drama between the Jewish people and God. And that is that God had sought to, in a sense, marry the Jewish people, and that in the course of time the Jewish people had acted faithlessly, and that in fact the exile that the Jewish people experienced was essentially a result of that lack of faith. And yet at the same time, Rashi says that Solomon composed this book anticipating this time, because essentially it says that God has never abandoned or rejected the Jewish people despite their faithlessness. And of course, we know there are others who would have liked to have said that the covenant that God had with the Jewish people was in fact replaced because of the Jewish people's sinfulness. So, I guess you pays your money and you makes your choice. So at least this is our understanding. So there's no excuse for sinfulness, but on the other hand, we believe that God is still compassionate and still yearns for the Jewish people to return, and likewise there are Jewish people who yearn for God to return as well in terms of that relationship. I'm going to share the text right now. And this is, you should be able to see it in a moment. I think you can see it now. I'm going to make it a little larger so that you can see it. This is the text of Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs in Hebrew. And this is the commentary by Rashi underneath, which we will look at. And I'm going to use my pointer so that you can see what Hebrew words I'm pointing at. Okay? So, Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo. So it means the Song of Songs that is Solomon's. So Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo. This is the catchphrase he's going to comment on. Shanu Rabotenu, our sages, our rabbis taught, Kol Shlomo, every word Shlomo, there's the word Shlomo here, right, that occurs. And this is a parenthetical note here, which I will read, okay? But let me just finish the sentence because it breaks up the sentence. And I'll explain that in a moment. Ha'amurim b'shir hashirim kodesh. It says what the rabbis say, that every time it comes across the word Shlomo in the Song of Songs, it does not mean King Solomon. It actually means Melech Shahashalom Shalom, the king to whom is peace, meaning that it's actually a reference to God, not to King Solomon. Okay. So I'm going to go back now and take a look at this. So why did they say this? De kashe lahem, because they have a difficulty. Lama lo miyachso achar aviv. why didn't this book start with Shir Hashirim Asher Lishlomo ben Melech David, or ben David, to Solomon, son of David? Why would they feel that it should have said that? Kamo b'mishlei v'kohelet, because if we look at the other two books for which Solomon is attributed, they are actually, yeah, that is the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes. If you actually go to those books and look at the opening verse of those books, you'll see it says Solomon, son of David. And here it doesn't say Solomon, son of David, which opens up an idea that this Solomon is not the son of David, meaning the king to whom peace is. That God is this essence, essential peace. So that's one. Yeah, Alex.
Sorry to interrupt you so early. How can that begin with Lamed and be Solomon?
Oh, so the le is simply, it's called a prefix. It's simply a prefix that stands for two or four. So there's certain letters that are utility letters, and Hebrew is a very compact language because instead of using separate words, it uses prefixes and suffixes. So okay, so the le is simply a utility letter to indicate according to, right? Or for, that it is for Shlomo.
Like the hay and shirim.
Yes, Hashirim. This Hay in Hashirim stands for the songs. Okay,
To
so
be
instead of
noted
two
and
words.
understood at a later date. Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah. We'll come across this very often. This is one of the things one learns when one studies Hebrew grammar. Okay. So going on with this, he's expounding on this further. Shir Shehu al Kol Hashirim. So the reason why it's the song of songs is it is the song that is over all the other songs. It is above all songs. Asher Ne'emar LaKadosh Baruch Hu, which are said to the Holy One or devoted to the Holy One, blessed be He. So, in other words, we're understanding this verse now as the song of all songs sung to God. Okay. Me'et adato, from his flock, v'amor, and his people, Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of Israel. Or as one of our great teachers used to say, modern teachers, Solomon Schechter, he loved to translate. You'll love this, Alex. He loved to translate Knesset Israel as Catholic Israel, because we know that the word Catholic actually means universal, as if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so Knesset Israel represents the entire body of the Jewish people, which can be subdivided into Ashkenazic and Sephardic and Reform and Conservative and Orthodox and etc. But here it's talking about the universal people Israel. Amar Rabbi Akiva is a lovely, lovely tradition that Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the greatest scholars, he was martyred, a brilliant, brilliant scholar during the first century, said Rabbi Akiva, Lo haya haolam kidai, the world was not worth existing, keyom shenitan bo shir hashirim. Okay, in other words, the world itself wasn't worthwhile until, as like the day on which Shir Hashirim was given, the Yisrael, to the Jewish people. So that's, of course, a mouthful, right? He's saying there's something so essential about what is expressed in this book, Shir Hashirim, in terms of, I believe, it says, you shall love, quote, quote, the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And you might look at this book as being an exposition of that statement in terms of its emotional, and relational meaning. He goes on to say, Rabbi Akiva goes on to say, Shekol Haktuvim Kodesh, because all scripture is holy, the Shir Hashirim Kodesh Kodashim, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. So if we were to look at the body of scripture as being like a temple, like the temple, right? The inner temple was divided into the holy part and the Holy of Holies, where the ark rested. New thought. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, said Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. This guy is one of my favorite people too. He kind of usually says cool things. Lema hadavar domeh. To what can this be compared? In other words, he's going to look for a parable. Lemelech, to a king. Excuse me. Shenatal se'ah hitin. He took a measure, a se'ah of wheat, v'natna lenachtom, and he gave it to a baker. Amar lo, and he said to him, Hotzei li kach v'chach solech, extract from this wheat for me so much of fine flour, kach v'chach sovin, and from this wheat that I've given you, this large amount of wheat, so much bran, kach v'chach borsin, and so much coarse bran, v'salit li mitocha gluskaya achat, and from all of this, sift out from all of this a white and delicate bread, the gluskaot, or this like sweetmeats of bread, okay, flour, cakes, a cake, right? Minupa umeula, that's well sifted and of highest quality, and that's as it that. So we're looking. He's going to explain now how the parable works, but essentially you want to visualize the entire scripture as being this se'ah of wheat. Okay, it's all wheat, right? So he says, Kach kol haktuvim kodesh, and so here all scripture is holy, v'shir hashirim kodesh kodashim. So he's appealing to those of us who are foodies, okay, and saying you can compare the shir hashirim, depends on what particular dessert or whatever baked good you like the best, but let's say for me it might be baklava, right? Shekulo yirat shamayim. Why is it so holy of holies? Because the entire book is composed of fear of heaven, v'kibul ol malchuto, and the acceptance of the divine yoke. Let me explain those expressions, right? Yirat shamayim is, I think, a very misunderstood phrase. There are people, throughout my career as a rabbi, there are people who say, why would you want to be afraid, etc. And I think the idea is that it's the antithesis of how people ignore the divine power, who go through their lives without any sense of any higher power than their own or than human. And Yirat Shamayim means the taking very seriously and to a great level of respect the idea of a divine ruler, a divine sovereign. That is Yirat Shamayim. And one of the practical outcomes of that is that if in fact you're Yirat Shamayim, if you're described as someone who is a Yirat Shamayim, God-fearing, it means that even if no other human being could ever discover you're doing a criminal or wrongful act, you still wouldn't do it because you know that God knows. That's one of the practical outcomes of being a Yirat Shamayim. The Kibul ol Malchuto and the acceptance of the divine yoke. So all the 613 commandments that are part of traditional Judaism are understood as a yoke. They're described often as a yoke because just as a yoke controls an ox as to where it needs to go and it controls its behavior, so the mitzvot are there to help us discipline. It's a discipline to control our behavior. So that's what he says is why Shir Hashirim is so, so precious and so holy. And if you think about it, so some of you will appreciate it because I constantly say that the Torah, etc., that the subtext of the Torah is doing what doesn't come naturally, right? If it came naturally, it wouldn't need to be given. It's my argument. So that's the opening verse. This area here, of course, is Torah Tmima. It is a very, it's a further expansion and commentary on these verses. Basically, the author of this is looking for various places in the rabbinic tradition, and he cites them and then tries to put them in easier language to understand. And then, of course, we do study this on Sundays, right? At least we're studying the Genesis commentary he has, and he has his own personal comments on these things that are quite interesting and illuminating. So, verse 2, Yishakeni minishikot piha. Let him kiss me with the kisses of the mouth. Ki tovim dodecha, for your love is better miyayin. So there's another, see, a prefix here, which means from, right? Your love is better than wine. Yayin is the Hebrew word for wine. So here we go. Yishakeni minishikot pihu. Let him kiss me with kisses of the mouth. Zeh hashir, this poem, this song, omeret befiha begaluta. Okay, so it's saying, what it's saying is, with her mouth, right? Begaluta, in her exile, uve almanuta, and sometimes the Jewish people is seen as a widow, and in her widowhood, this is what she says. Mi tani, could it only be, were it possible, v'yashkeni hamelech Shlomo menishikot pihu, that King Solomon should kiss me with kisses of the mouth. Kamo me'az, as he did in former times. Again, understood, this is the text itself is reading that way. The fi sheyesh mekomot, why mention specifically kisses of the mouth? Sheyesh mekomot, because there are places, shenoshkin al gav yad, they're places where you express your admiration and your love by kissing on the back of the hand, right? Va'al hakatef, or on the shoulder. Ach ani, but I, this is the Jewish people, as it were, says, right? Mitava v'shokeket, I am seized with desire and longing, lioto nehegeni, that he should treat me, kemin hag harishon, the way he treated me originally, kechatan al kala, like a bridegroom on a bride, pe el pe, mouth to mouth. Ki tovin, because better, right? Wonderful, good. Li dodecha, because your love, this is love for me, mikol mishte yain, is better. The reason why it's talking about wine is because it's better than any feast. Mishte yain, feast of wine. But he's going to explain this, that essentially it refers to a banquet. Umikol oneg besimcha, and it gives me more pleasure than anything else, from any pleasure and joy. Relashon ivrihu, and he says it's a Hebrew expression. It's the way Hebrew expresses liyot kol seudat oneg, that any banquet, right, besimcha, and joy. In other words, any celebratory banquet, nikret al shem yayin, should have some reference to wine. So wine actually, of course, is a symbol of joy, which is why we sanctify the Sabbath and the holidays over a glass of wine, to symbolize the joy of being able to celebrate these festivals or the Sabbath. In Yan Shneimar, so he gives some examples. In the book of Esther, chapter 7, El Beit Mishteh Hayayin. So there we say it, to the house of the banquet of wine. And in Isaiah 24, Beshir lo yishto yayin. When they are singing, they should not drink wine. But again, talking about a banquet here. V'haya kinor v'nevel v'chalil v'tof. And again, this is also in Isaiah. It says, and there shall be the harp and the lute. Hard to translate in some ways, these musical instruments. Khalil would be a flute. Tof is translated as a drum or a tambourine. V'yayin, right? And wine.
Can
Mish.
you,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
what's the proper way to ask a question?
What you can do is raise your hand. You
Okay.
should see something
Oh,
on your screen to raise a
yeah.
hand. It's okay. Just come on. Just go ahead and ask the question then.
What is the reference in Isaiah for the lute and the harp? There's a wonderful Handel aria, so shall the lute and harp, and I'm just
Right. He, I don't know exactly how it's found. I didn't look at the context. The point, though, is he's making is that he's talking. So here's mishtehem, right? Their drinking or their banquet. So that it includes, assumedly, all these different things. But so he's talking about all the instruments, and now he's talking about wine. And so this has to do with a mishteh is, and by the way, the shata in Hebrew means to drink. So it has to do with a banquet. All that Rashi wants to do here is to prove his point that when they're talking about a banquet, they refer to wine. It symbolizes the joy of the occasion, that it's not just an ordinary meal. Zehu bi'ur mashma'o. And Rashi goes on to say, and this is what I've explained to this point in this verse is simply its basic meaning. In other words, its literal meaning. V'ne'emar dugma shelo. But when we look at it as a metaphor, al shem shenatan lahem, the reason why this is saying, let him kiss me with kisses of the mouth, it has to do with shenatan lahem Torato, because when God gave the Torah, the Ten Commandments, right, and the whole Torah to the Jewish people, v'diber imahem panim el panim. It mentions that at that particular moment, God spoke to them. The expression is face to face. In other words, when the Israelites were standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, they actually heard the divine voice speaking the first two of the Ten Commandments. And if you look carefully at the language of the Ten Commandments, you'll notice that the first two commandments are stated in the first person, I, the Lord your God. Okay? And the rest of the commandments refer to God in the third person. So the tradition is that the Israelites actually heard God speaking. And of course, if you study the passages there, you'll see that they were scared out of their wits at that particular moment. But regardless, those kisses of the mouth are seen as that divine closeness. The otam dodim, and that those expressions of love, odam arevim alehem. That is to say that the very giving of the Torah, the very revelation of the words of the Torah are still pleasant to them. Mikol sha'ashua, from any delight, any other delight, umuftachim me'ito, and he has reassured them, right? They are reassured from him, lohofia, to appear, od alehem, again to them. Leva'er lahem, in other words, what they hope in the future, because obviously we have so much of the Torah, we have the Torah written down, we have its text and so many elements towards it, but that in the future he would explain to them sod ta'ameha, the secrets of its reasons, in other words, for why these mitzvot, these commandments were given, o mistar sfunoteha, and the mystery of its hidden parts of the texts. Sorry, I want to make sure. Umechalim panav, and they are entreating God, lekayem dvaro, to establish his word, vezehu, and this is the meaning of yashkeni menishikot piha. Let him kiss me with kisses of the mouth. That it's actually a metaphor for future revelation and the desire to be close to God. And hopefully on next time we meet, we'll continue to the next verse and discuss that verse and Rashi's explanation of it. So that'll be here. Oops, sorry. A second. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.